The whispers followed Madeline James like shadows, stretching long across the dusty streets of Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878. "There goes the widow who ain't really a widow," they'd say, just loud enough for her to hear as she passed with her basket of goods from the general store. Madeline had never been married, never been widowed, but the townsfolk found it easier to explain away a woman of 25 living alone on the outskirts of town if they pretended she was grieving rather than independent. The truth that she had chosen this life was somehow more scandalous than any fiction they could create. "Miss James," Mrs. Peterson called from the porch of the millinery shop, her tone sweet but her eyes calculating. "The church social is this Sunday. I do hope you'll join us. Pastor Williams has a nephew visiting from Tucson, a banker, I believe." Madeline smiled politely, adjusting her grip on her heavy basket. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Peterson, but I've got crops that need tending, perhaps another time." "Crops, Mrs. Peterson huffed as Madeline walked away, as if a woman alone could make that land produce anything worth selling. But Madeline's small farm did produce vegetables hardy enough to sell and trade in town, and enough to keep herself fed through the harsh desert winters. The 10 acres she'd purchased, with money saved from years of teaching, had become both her sanctuary and her pride, though few in Fort McDowell understood why any woman would choose solitude over the security of marriage. The sun beat down mercilessly as Madeline walked the mile and a half back to her homestead. The weight of her supplies and the growing heat made her steps slower, and she was grateful when the silhouette of her modest cabin came into view, nestled against the backdrop of saguaro cacti and distant mountains. She was nearly there when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Madeline stepped aside, expecting one of the ranch hands from the Lawson spread to pass by, but instead the rider slowed beside her. "Afternoon, madam," came a deep voice she didn't recognize. "Looks like you could use some help with that load." Madeline looked up to see a man atop a chestnut gelding, dust covered from the trail but with a kind face beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were the color of the Arizona sky in winter, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled down at her. "I'm managing just fine, thank you," she replied, continuing her walk. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion and fell into step beside her, leading his horse by the reins. "I don't doubt that for a second, but my mama would haunt me from her grave if I didn't offer to help a lady carrying a burden." Madeline paused, studying him. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Madeline James." "Daniel Lawson," he replied with a slight bow of his head. "Just passing through on my way to California." "Well, Mr. Lawson, Fort McDowell is a small place. We don't get many travelers who aren't looking for trouble or running from it. Which are you?" His laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that seemed to lighten the desert air. "Neither, Miss James. I'm a horseman by trade, buying, selling, training. Heard there might be work at some of the ranches this way." After a moment's hesitation, Madeline allowed him to take her basket. They walked in companionable silence until they reached her property line, marked by a simple wooden fence. "This is yours?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice as he surveyed her small cabin, the well-tended garden plots, and the modest chicken coop. "It is," she affirmed, taking back her basket. "Thank you for the assistance, Mr. Lawson, but this is where we part ways." Daniel looked like he wanted to say more, but instead tipped his hat respectfully. "It was a pleasure, Miss James. Perhaps our paths will cross again." She watched him ride away, telling herself the flutter in her chest was simply from the heat and exertion, nothing more. The next morning dawned clear and hot, as most days did in the Arizona Territory. Madeline was in her garden before the sun was fully up, harvesting what was ripe and watering what wasn't. The sound of approaching horses made her straighten, wiping soil from her hands onto her apron. Sheriff Collins reined in his horse at her fence, 2 other men with him. One she recognized as Bartholomew Ellis, the town banker. The other was a ranch owner named Mason who rarely came into town, "Morning, Miss James," the sheriff called. "Mind if we have a word?" Madeline approached the fence, keeping her expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Had some cattle go missing from Mason's ranch last night. Tracks lead this way." "Are you suggesting I stole them?" Madeline asked, her voice even despite the indignation rising in her throat. Ellis shifted uncomfortably on his horse, but Mason leaned forward with a scowl. "Not saying you did, but that drifter was seen talking to you yesterday. Mighty convenient he shows up and cattle disappear on the same day. Mr. Lawson simply helped me with my packages. I haven't seen him since." Sheriff Collins sighed. "Miss James, it would be safer if you had someone staying with you. A woman alone out here, it invites trouble." "I've been alone for 3 years, Sheriff, and the only trouble I've had is from people who can't accept that fact," Mason snorted. "It ain't natural, a woman your age without a husband." "People talk. Let them talk," Madeline replied. "I have work to do." As the men rode away, Madeline returned to her garden, but her peaceful morning had been shattered. It wasn't the first time the townsfolk had used their concerns about her safety as a way to voice their disapproval of her lifestyle. And it wouldn't be the last. Later that afternoon, as Madeline was hanging laundry to dry in the relentless sun, the sound of a horse approaching made her pause. This time it was Daniel Lawson, Mr. Lawson, she acknowledged, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "I thought you were passing through." "I was," he replied, dismounting. "Found some work at the Sullivan Ranch breaking horses, temporary but the pay is good." Madeline nodded, returning to her task. "The sheriff and some others paid me a visit this morning," Daniel continued. "Seemed to think I might have something to do with some missing cattle." "They visited me as well," Madeline admitted. "Apparently, our brief acquaintance makes us both suspicious." Daniel leaned against her fence post, watching her with those clear blue eyes. "They also had plenty to say about you," Madeline stiffened. "I'm sure they did. They think you're foolish for living out here alone, said no decent woman would choose such a life." She faced him fully now, anger flaring. "And what do you think, Mr. Lawson?" "I think," he said slowly, "that what you're doing takes more courage and strength than most men I know possess, including those who were so quick to judge you." His words caught her off guard. In 3 years, no one had ever suggested that her choice to live independently was born of strength rather than foolishness or desperation. "Thank you," she said simply, unsure how else to respond. "I also came to warn you," Daniel added, his expression turning serious. "Those cattle rustlers are real and they're bold. The Sullivan place was hit 2 nights ago. Would you allow me to check your property, make sure everything's secure?" Madeline hesitated, her instinct for self-reliance warring with practical concern. "Very well," she agreed finally. As Daniel walked the perimeter of her small property, checking the sturdiness of her fence and the lock on her barn, Madeline found herself studying him. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Your place is well kept," he commented when he returned. "But that lock on your barn won't hold against anyone determined to get in. I could fix it for you if you'd like." "I can fix it myself," she replied automatically. Daniel grinned. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss James. But sometimes it's nice to accept help, even when you don't strictly need it." Something in his smile made it impossible for her to maintain her usual reserve. "All right, Mr. Lawson, you may fix my lock." Over the next few days, Daniel made a habit of stopping by Madeline's farm on his way to and from the Sullivan Ranch. Each visit brought a small offering, a repaired fence post, fresh milk from the ranch, stories from his travels that made her laugh despite herself. And each time he left, Madeline found herself watching him go with a strange sense of anticipation for his return. "You don't have to keep checking on me," she told him one evening as they sat on her porch, the sunset painting the desert in gold and crimson. "I managed quite well before you arrived." "I know," Daniel replied, his voice soft in the gathering dusk, "but I like the view from your porch and the company." Madeline felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the fading light. "Where did you learn to train horses?" she asked, changing the subject. "My father was a cavalry officer. Taught me everything I know about horses before he was killed at Gettysburg. After that, it was just me and my mother until she passed 5 years ago. Been on my own ever since, going where the work takes me." "I'm sorry about your parents," Madeline said sincerely. Daniel shrugged. "Life deals its cards. Some hands are better than others, but you play what you're given." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you end up here all on your own?" Madeline was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She rarely spoke of her past, not because it was tragic, but because few ever asked with genuine interest. "My father was a schoolteacher in Boston. He believed women deserved education as much as men. When he died, my mother and I moved west with my uncle. She remarried a man who didn't share my father's views. He thought a woman's place was in the home, serving her husband." "I take it you disagreed," Daniel said with a small smile. "Vehemently," Madeline confirmed. "I left when I was 18, found work as a teacher in Tucson. Saved every penny until I could buy this place. It isn't much, but it's mine." Daniel's gaze swept over her small homestead. "It's more than most people ever own outright. You should be proud." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of gunshots. Daniel was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, but Madeline was already reaching for the shotgun she kept by the door. "It's my property, Mr. Lawson. I won't hide in my house while someone threatens it." Together they moved cautiously toward the barn, where Madeline kept her 2 milk cows and the mule she used for plowing. The night was dark, with only a sliver of moon to illuminate their path. A shadowy figure darted from the barn door, and Daniel called out, "Stop right there." The figure didn't stop, instead firing a wild shot in their direction. Daniel returned fire as the man leapt onto a waiting horse and galloped away. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, turning to Madeline with concern etched on his face. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was racing. "Let's check the animals." The cows were unharmed, but the lock on the barn had been broken, just as Daniel had predicted. Inside, they found evidence that someone had been searching through her small store of tools and supplies. "Probably looking for anything worth stealing," Daniel said, surveying the mess. "Or trying to scare me," Madeline added quietly. Daniel looked at her sharply. "You think this was deliberate, aimed at you specifically?" Madeline sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. "There are people in town who find my independence unsettling. Nothing would please them more than to see me fail, to be forced to accept a husband or move back east." Daniel's expression hardened. "We should report this to the sheriff." "And tell him what?" "That someone broke into my barn but didn't steal anything. He'll just say it's another reason a woman shouldn't live alone." "Then I'll stay tonight," Daniel said firmly. "Make sure they don't come back." Madeline opened her mouth to refuse, then closed it again. The truth was, she was shaken, and the thought of Daniel's presence was more comforting than she wanted to admit. "You can sleep on the porch," she conceded. Daniel smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I've slept in worse places." That night, as Madeline lay in her bed listening to the occasional creak of the porch floorboards as Daniel kept watch, she found herself contemplating how quickly he had become a fixture in her daily life. It had been just 10 days since he'd first helped her with her packages, yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever he appeared at her fence. It was dangerous, this feeling. She had built her life on self-reliance, on not needing anyone. To allow herself to depend on Daniel's presence, to look forward to it, was to risk the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. Yet there was something different about the way he regarded her. Not as a woman in need of protection or guidance, but as an equal deserving of respect. It was a novel experience, and one that made it increasingly difficult to maintain her emotional distance. Morning came with the scent of coffee brewing. Madeline dressed quickly and found Daniel in her kitchen, looking surprisingly at home as he tended to the stove. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the pot. "Seemed the least I could do after you let me stay." "I don't mind," she replied, accepting the cup he offered. They shared a simple breakfast, and when it was time for Daniel to leave for work, Madeline found herself reluctant to see him go. "I'll be back this evening," he promised, "just to make sure everything's quiet." "That isn't necessary," she began, but Daniel cut her off with a gentle smile. "I know it isn't necessary, Miss James, but I'd like to all the same if you'll allow it." After he left, Madeline went about her daily chores, but her thoughts kept returning to Daniel. There was no denying the attraction she felt, but was it worth risking everything she'd built? Her independence wasn't just about living alone, it was about making her own choices, answering to no one but herself. That afternoon, Madeline went into town for supplies, steeling herself for the usual whispers and stares. She was examining fabric at the general store when she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "Did you hear about Madeline James and that drifter?" one asked in a stage whisper. "The one staying at her place. Everyone's talking about it, so much for her claims of wanting independence. First handsome cowboy that comes along, and she throws propriety right out the window. Sheriff should run him out of town. Man like that's only after one thing, and it ain't her land." Madeline's hand tightened on the bolt of cloth, but she forced herself to continue browsing as if she hadn't heard. The gossip stung, not because she cared what they thought of her, but because they had reduced Daniel's kindness to something sordid. As she was leaving the store, basket heavier than before, she nearly collided with Eleanor Sullivan, wife of the rancher who had hired Daniel. "Miss James," Eleanor greeted her with genuine warmth. Unlike most of the town's women, Eleanor had always been kind to Madeline. "I was hoping to run into you. I wanted to invite you to dinner at our ranch this Saturday. Nothing formal, just a few friends." "That's very kind, Mrs. Sullivan, but Daniel Lawson speaks very highly of you," Eleanor continued with a knowing smile. "Says you're the most capable woman he's ever met. High praise, considering the man grew up with a mother who ran a farm while his father was away at war." Madeline felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Lawson has been very helpful since his arrival." "I'm sure he has," Eleanor replied, her eyes twinkling. "So you'll come to dinner? Daniel will be there, of course." "I'll think about it," Madeline promised, unwilling to commit but unable to refuse outright. As she walked home, Madeline pondered Eleanor's invitation. She rarely socialized, finding most gatherings in Fort McDowell to be thinly veiled attempts at matchmaking or opportunities for gossip. But the thought of seeing Daniel in a different setting, away from her property where he always came as a visitor, was oddly appealing. The decision was made for her when she arrived home to find 3 men on horseback waiting by her fence. She recognized them as cowboys from the Lawson ranch, none of whom she knew well. "Afternoon, Miss James." The oldest of the 3 greeted her, his tone falsely pleasant. "Heard you had some trouble last night," Madeline approached cautiously. "News travels fast." "Small town," he replied with a shrug. "We was thinking a woman alone out here might be better if you sold this place. Mr. Lawson would give you a fair price." "My farm isn't for sale," Madeline replied firmly. The second man spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Be a shame if more trouble found you. Dangerous times for folks without protection." The threat was thinly veiled, and Madeline felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter?" "Just stating facts, madam. Things happen out here in the territory. Accidents, fires. Man like Lawson can keep those things from happening." "I think you should leave," Madeline said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Think on it," the first man advised as they turned their horses. "Offer won't stand forever." As they rode away, Madeline hurried inside, her hands trembling as she set down her basket. The encounter left her shaken in a way the break-in hadn't. These weren't random rustlers, but men she saw in town, men who worked for one of the most powerful ranchers in the area. When Daniel arrived that evening, he found her sitting on the porch, shotgun across her lap, staring out at the darkening horizon. "Madeline?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as he dismounted. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She told him about the men's visit, watching as his expression hardened with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. "Larson's wanted your land for years," he finally said. "Sullivan told me as much when I started working for him, said Larson believes he should control the water rights for the whole valley. My property has the only natural spring that doesn't dry up in summer," Madeline explained. "I've never denied anyone water when they needed it, but I won't sell my land." Daniel sat beside her on the porch step, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You shouldn't have to. What those men did was illegal. We should tell the sheriff." Madeline laughed humorlessly. "Sheriff Collins plays poker with Larson every Friday night. He won't cross him over threats that can't be proven." "Then what will you do?" She turned to look at him, steeling herself. "What I've always done, stand my ground." Daniel's gaze was intense, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "Alone?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Madeline felt her heart beat faster, knowing that however she answered would change everything. "I accepted Mrs. Sullivan's dinner invitation," she said instead of answering directly. "For Saturday." Daniel's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'll be there too." Saturday evening arrived with a clarity to the desert air that came only in early autumn. Madeline wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. She hitched her mule to the small wagon and set off for the Sullivan Ranch, both excited and nervous about the evening ahead. The Sullivan home was the largest in the area, a sprawling adobe structure with a wide veranda and manicured gardens that defied the desert surroundings. As Madeline approached, she saw several horses and wagons already there, indicating she wasn't the first to arrive. Daniel appeared as if from nowhere to help her down from the wagon. He was dressed in clean clothes, his usually tousled hair tamed, though a stubborn lock still fell across his forehead. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering her his arm. Madeline took it, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his compliment. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Lawson." The evening was pleasant, with good food and conversation that carefully avoided the topics of cattle rustlers and threatening visitors. Eleanor Sullivan proved an excellent hostess, making sure Madeline was included in every discussion and seating her next to Daniel at dinner. As the night progressed, Madeline found herself relaxing, enjoying the normalcy of social interaction that didn't revolve around judgment of her lifestyle. The Sullivans and their friends treated her with respect, asking about her garden and her teaching experiences with genuine interest. After dinner, as the men enjoyed cigars and the women gathered for tea, Eleanor pulled Madeline aside. "I'm so glad you came," she said warmly. "Daniel hasn't been able to take his eyes off you all evening." Madeline felt her cheeks heat. "Mrs. Sullivan, Eleanor, please, and before you protest, let me say this. I understand your desire for independence. I admire it, truly. But independence doesn't have to mean isolation, Madeline. Sometimes the strongest choice is to let someone stand beside you, not because you need them to, but because you choose to." Eleanor's words stayed with Madeline as Daniel drove her home later that night, the stars brilliant in the clear desert sky. They were silent for much of the journey, but it was a comfortable silence, punctuated occasionally by Daniel pointing out constellations. When they reached her cabin, Daniel insisted on checking the property before he left. Finding everything secure, he returned to where Madeline waited on the porch. "I should get back to the Sullivan place," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Yes, you should," Madeline agreed, equally stationary. Daniel took a step closer, close enough that she could see the starlight reflected in his eyes. "Madeline, a gunshot cracked through the night, the bullet splintering wood just inches from where they stood." Daniel reacted instantly, pushing Madeline down and drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. "Inside," he ordered, and this time Madeline didn't argue. Once they were safely inside with the door barred, Daniel peered cautiously through the window. "I can't see anyone." They might have fired from the tree line. Madeline's hands shook as she lit a lamp, keeping the flame low. "This is because of Lawson. He's trying to scare me off my land." Daniel's expression was grim as he turned to face her. "This goes beyond scaring. That shot could have killed one of us." "What do I do?" Madeline whispered, hating the tremor in her voice but unable to suppress it. Daniel crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. They were warm and calloused, steady against her trembling fingers. "You have options, Madeline. You could sell." "No," she interrupted fiercely. "I won't be bullied off my land. You could take this to the territorial governor, bypass the sheriff entirely. That would take weeks, if not months, and I'd still be here alone in the meantime." Daniel's grip on her hands tightened slightly. "You don't have to be alone." Madeline looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or condescension, but finding only concern and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "What are you suggesting?" "Let me stay. Not just tonight, but until this is resolved. I can sleep in the barn if propriety is a concern, but at least you'd have someone watching your back." The offer was tempting, more tempting than Madeline wanted to admit. But accepting help, especially from a man, felt dangerously close to admitting she couldn't manage on her own. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel continued softly, "Accepting help doesn't make you weak, Madeline. It doesn't diminish what you've built here. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is recognize when they don't have to fight alone." His words echoed Alina's from earlier that evening, and something inside Madeline shifted, a rigid belief beginning to bend. "All right," she conceded. "You can stay in the barn for now." Relief flooded Daniel's face, followed quickly by determination. "First thing tomorrow, we're going to the Sullivans. If anyone in this area has the influence to stand against Lawson, it's them." That night, despite the lingering fear from the shooting, Madeline slept better knowing Daniel was nearby. In the morning, she found him already up, checking the property for any sign of their nighttime visitors. "Found some tracks," he reported as she joined him by the fence. 3 riders headed toward Lawson's ranch. "Hardly proof," Madeline sighed. "No, but it's something. Get dressed for town." "We're going to see Sullivan." The ride to the Sullivan Ranch was tense, both of them watching for any sign of trouble. When they arrived, they found George Sullivan in his stables, inspecting a new horse. "Daniel, Miss James," he greeted them with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you so soon after last night." Daniel explained the situation while Sullivan listened gravely, his weathered face growing harder with each detail. "Lawson's gone too far this time," he said when Daniel had finished. "Taking shots at a woman's home. That's not ranching, that's terrorism." "What can we do?" Madeline asked. Sullivan stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Lawson's powerful, but he's not above the law. Problem is proving it was his men, but I've got an idea." The plan Sullivan proposed was simple but effective. He would host a community meeting on the disputed water rights, inviting all the local ranchers and farmers, including Lawson. During the meeting, he would propose a formal agreement that would protect Madeline's right to her land while ensuring fair water access for everyone. "Lawson won't like it," Sullivan warned, "but he can't refuse to attend without looking suspicious. And he can't openly object to fair water rights without alienating every small rancher in the territory." "What about the shooting?" Daniel asked. "He needs to answer for that." "One step at a time," Sullivan advised. "First, we secure Madeline's legal position, then we address the intimidation tactics." The meeting was set for the following Sunday after church, giving Sullivan time to spread the word and prepare the necessary documents. In the meantime, Daniel continued to stay at Madeline's farm, sleeping in the barn and helping with chores during the day when he wasn't working at Sullivan's ranch. Their days fell into an easy rhythm, and Madeline found herself enjoying the companionship more than she had expected. Daniel never overstepped, never assumed control of her property or decisions, but was always ready with assistance when asked. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their lives before Fort McDowell, discovering shared interests in books and music. On the Saturday before the community meeting, Madeline was hanging laundry when Daniel approached from the barn, an oddly nervous expression on his face. "I was thinking," he began, then paused, running a hand through his hair. "Tomorrow, after the meeting. Would you allow me to take you to dinner at the hotel? As a proper outing, not just two people sharing a meal out of convenience." Madeline's hands stilled on the damp sheet she was hanging. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Lawson?" "I am," he confirmed, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Though I was hoping we might be past Mr. Lawson by now." Madeline felt a smile of her own forming. "Daniel, then, and yes, I would like that." The brightness of his answering smile warmed her more than the Arizona sun ever could. Sunday arrived clear and warm. The church in Fort McDowell, more crowded than usual as word of Sullivan's meeting, had brought people from throughout the valley. Madeline sat with Eleanor Sullivan, conscious of the stares and whispers as Daniel sat directly behind her, closer than propriety might dictate, but a clear statement of his support. After the service, the congregation moved to the large tent that had been erected next to the church for community gatherings. Sullivan took his place at the front, with Madeline and Daniel seated nearby. Across the tent, Jacob Lawson sat with his men, his expression stony. "Friends and neighbors," Sullivan began, "we're gathered today to discuss an issue that affects us all: water rights in our valley. As you know, water is life out here, and how we share it determines whether we all prosper or only a few." He went on to outline the situation, carefully avoiding direct accusations but making it clear that intimidation tactics had been employed against some landowners. Many heads nodded in agreement, suggesting Madeline wasn't the only one who had faced pressure from Lawson. "I've drafted an agreement," Sullivan continued, holding up a document, "that would guarantee fair access to water for all property owners, regardless of the size of their holdings. It also includes provisions against coercion or forced sales. I'm proposing we all sign it, making it binding under territorial law." Lawson stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I've never forced anyone to sell. If some people find that running a farm or ranch is harder than they expected, that's not my concern." "No one's accused you specifically, Jacob," Sullivan replied mildly. "But surely you don't object to an agreement that protects everyone's rights." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Larson's face reddened. "I object to being ambushed with legal documents I haven't had time to review. And I object to the implication that I've done anything improper." "Then perhaps you can explain why 3 of your men threatened Miss James and told her to sell her land to you," Daniel said, rising to stand beside Madeline. "Or why someone fired shots at her home the night before last, and the tracks led back to your property." The crowd gasped, and all eyes turned to Lawson, who glared at Daniel with undisguised hatred. "You're a drifter, Lawson. Your word means nothing here." "Mine does," Eleanor Sullivan spoke up, her voice carrying clearly through the tent. "I've known Madeline James for years, and she's one of the most honest, hard-working people in this territory. If she says she was threatened, I believe her." One by one, others began to speak up: small farmers and ranchers who had also faced pressure from Lawson, shopkeepers who had been strong-armed into exclusive supply arrangements, even the blacksmith who admitted to being paid to delay repairs on Madeline's wagon last winter. The tide of public opinion turned visibly against Lawson as more stories emerged. Finally, Sheriff Collins, who had been sitting uncomfortably throughout the proceedings, stood up. "I think it's clear we need a formal investigation into these allegations," he announced, avoiding Larson's furious gaze. "In the meantime, I suggest everyone sign Mr. Sullivan's agreement. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Lawson stormed out, followed by his most loyal men, but the majority of those present lined up to sign the document, including the sheriff. When it was Madeline's turn, she signed her name with steady hands, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's not over," Daniel warned quietly as they left the tent. "Lawson won't give up easily." "I know," Madeline replied, "but for the first time I don't feel like I'm facing him alone." Their dinner at the hotel that evening was more celebratory than either had anticipated. News of the meeting had spread quickly through town, and several patrons stopped by their table to express support for Madeline, including some who had previously been among her harshest critics. "Funny how quickly people change their tune when the wind shifts," Daniel observed as an elderly woman who had once crossed the street to avoid Madeline now insisted on buying them dessert. "People like to be on the winning side," Madeline replied with a small smile. "I don't mind as long as they leave me in peace." As they walked back to her farm under a canopy of stars, Daniel took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm despite the cooling night air. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I was only passing through when we met." Had plans to be in California by now. Madeline's heart stuttered. "You still could be. The Sullivans would understand if you wanted to move on." Daniel stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "That's not what I meant. I'm trying to say that meeting you changed everything for me. For the first time in years, I'm thinking about putting down roots." "Daniel," Madeline began, uncertain how to respond to the intensity in his voice. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he assured her quickly. "I understand how much your independence means to you. I would never want to take that away, but I'm hoping there might be room in your life for partnership without sacrifice." Madeline studied his face in the silvery light, seeing nothing but sincerity in his eyes. The fear that had always accompanied thoughts of attachment, fear of losing herself, of being diminished, was absent when she looked at him. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to find out." Daniel's smile was brighter than the stars overhead as he leaned down to kiss her. A gentle, questioning touch that Madeline answered by stepping closer, her hand rising to rest against his chest. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Fort McDowell. Sheriff Collins, perhaps sensing which way the political winds were blowing, launched a thorough investigation into Lawson's activities. Evidence of cattle rustling, land fraud, and intimidation mounted quickly once people felt safe enough to come forward. Lawson was eventually arrested and his ranch seized by the territorial government, to be divided among those he had wronged. Madeline received additional acreage adjacent to her property as compensation for the harassment she had endured. Daniel continued to court her properly, taking her to social gatherings in town and on picnics in the desert when the weather allowed. He remained in the barn until the day, 6 months after they met, when he proposed marriage under the cottonwood tree beside her garden. "I know you value your independence," he said, holding both her hands in his. "And I promise that will never change. Your land remains yours, your decisions remain yours. I'm asking to walk beside you, not lead you or follow you, but to face whatever comes together." Tears blurred Madeline's vision as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. Daniel slipped a simple silver band onto her finger, then lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. They were married in the spring of 1879, with the Sullivans as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Many of those who had once mocked Madeline for living alone now celebrated her marriage, though some still whispered that she had finally come to her senses. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers outside the church, Mrs. Peterson approached with her usual calculating smile. "Well, Miss James, Mrs. Lawson now, I suppose it seems you've finally found the security you needed. A woman wasn't meant to face the world alone." Before Madeline could respond, Daniel spoke, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. "My wife didn't need security, Mrs. Peterson. She lived stronger than any of us, making her own way when others would have faltered. I'm the fortunate one in this marriage to have won the heart of such a remarkable woman." Mrs. Peterson's smile froze, and she moved away quickly, but Madeline looked up at her husband with gratitude and love shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Only the truth," Daniel replied, squeezing her hand. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and purple, Madeline rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Madeline considered the question, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the loneliness, the determination that had sustained her, and now the partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her strength. Yes, she answered simply. More than I ever thought possible. As darkness fell over the Arizona desert, the lights of their cabin glowed warmly, no longer a solitary beacon of one woman's independence, but a testament to the possibility that love could exist without surrender, that two people could build something stronger together than either could alone. And in Fort McDowell, the story began to change, not of the stubborn woman who lived alone, but of the couple who proved that true strength lies in choosing your own path, whether that path is walked alone or side by side with someone who respects your journey as their own.